I think in this leadership race, we saw 4 people who, were in this thing to the end, and Carney win by a mile, like miles, right? And so I think perhaps the emphasis that he had to place on putting the party back together again, because a lot of times, like when you think about like the old delegated conventions, somebody wins at the end of it, and there's the party's kind of broken up into factions around people who supported other people. But now that's not the case. There's so much unity around Carney. Perhaps he felt less of a need to bring her in as an opponent. But yet, I think, in my view, it's a misstep. I think she's extremely popular with young people. She represents a progressive, kind of more social side of the party that a businessman like Carney might want to show he's covering off in the Liberal context, and he's not doing it. And
I'm going to jump in because we see there François-Philippe Champagne waving to the members of the media. Walking in with him was Rachel Van Duyn, as well as Gary Ananda-Sangri. So looking at those, although, I will share, and it's now being reported widely, again, we're going to have to see what the final cabinet list is, that Ananda-Sangri, who was Parliamentary Secretary in Justice, will be shifted as Justice Minister, because he's someone who already knows the file.
Well, he's actually also the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, Crown Relations, so yes, he's already a cabinet minister. But to Laurie's point, it's making a more streamlined cabinet, and it is only going to last potentially 6 weeks.
I'm sorry to jump in, just because David Johnston's making his way now to Rideau Hall, former Governor General, which surprises me. I wouldn't expect him to.
I think he'd be an invited guest from Mark Carney. There will be a large number of people obviously invited to watch the swearing in. But just to make that final point, this is only a 6-week cabinet. It will change ultimately if he wins the election campaign, Mark Carney and the Liberals, or obviously if they don't, it will be one of the shortest lived cabinets ever. So I wouldn't read a ton into that right now. He is focusing on the immediate challenges the government faces, primarily imposed by the relations now with Donald Trump and his tariff war.
Although, I hear what you're saying, but there's also this parlance around this cabinet. It's not going to be, from all expectations, it's not going to be a cabinet in a traditional sense, because we're expecting the writs to be dropped in about a week's time. But they do take on this caretaker position during any campaign. And given the fact that we are in the midst of a trade war, given the fact that Donald Trump seems to upend the world every weekend at 2 a.m. with some type of social media post, that they will arguably be called upon more than other caretaker cabinets in the past. So can you talk a bit about that, Laurie, about how this is being positioned? Again, the parlance right now is a temporary or a wartime cabinet as we get ready for an election campaign.
Sure. I mean, I think some of these people are going to end up probably in an extremely active role because of what's going on with Trump. And the caretaker convention provides for that, right? If you look at it, it's, clearly when there's the government is supposed to
we'll see an opportunity here to drive home his point that Canada would be better off as a 51st state.
Yeah, well, and someone who is very much against the parlance of the 51st state is Jean Chrétien, former Prime Minister. That is his back that we're looking at right now. But we can confirm that is Jean Chrétien. Of course, people gathered around him to hear what he has to say on this momentous day, the swearing in of Mark Carney as Canada's 24th Prime Minister, a new government, and in Jean Chrétien's case, for him, a new Liberal government being sworn in. Of course, he addressing the convention last Sunday when Mark Carney was elected by the Liberal members. You know, we don't know what Jean Chrétien's saying right now, but perhaps we can turn that around in a few minutes' time. But Laura, you want to say something about, you know, Donald Trump and the effect on an upcoming election.
Well, the one thing I was thinking, just listening to Chris, is somebody who might take some of that heat is Doug Ford, because he's gone through, he's got, you know, he had his story about he needs a new mandate, which he didn't, but he got it anyway. And now he's quite vocal, obviously, right? Like, he's fine to go in, pick a fight with those guys, you know, poke at them, make his own announcements in terms of measures that he might take. And I mean, I believe this is all in coordination with Dominic LeBlanc and with Mark Carney. But at the same time, as we see the campaign go on, and I wouldn't be surprised if Carney goes for the full 50, 51 days, just try to see what, you know, if he can kind of make up some time with the electorate and take advantage of that. But I wouldn't be surprised if we heard a lot from Doug Ford during this time, because he's been front and center.
Okay.
He can take that role.
Sorry to interrupt. Let's take a listen to Jean Chrétien.
Ben, il va faire de son mieux. Il n'y a pas de solution, on n'a jamais vu
there
ça.
are no solution. This is completely unprecedented. It's not normal. We've never seen a person that changes its mind every 5 minutes and that is heading the United States. It's creating issues not only in Canada but everywhere around the world. There was an interview at BBC in London. They're having issues, Europe as well, and on the rest of the world. I know him well. I think he's going to do his best.
How tough a job is Mr. Carney facing right now?
It's a tough job. But you don't get in this job to have an easy job. I was on Parliament Hill for 40 years and it was fun. Thank you.
Merci.
Be careful for this. Just be careful, sir.
And there you have it, Jean Chrétien, former Prime Minister of Canada. Liberal stalwart, as we heard him last Sunday, coming in right now to Rideau Hall. Asked a number of questions. We got the tail end of that, but you know, you got to smile when Jean Chrétien's asked how tough a job does Mark Carney has, and he says tough job, but that's why you do this, right? So, and it is going to be a tough job, particularly with Donald Trump, but also with the Liberal Party, because he is now tasked with rebuilding this party. Trudeau brings it from third place back to government, ends the debate of whether or not there's an existential threat to the Liberal Party, although now, a few months ago, that existential threat seemed to be hovering over their head once again, and Mark Carney has taken the first few steps of recovering that. We'll see where that goes, and as I say that, there is, I just want to show you one more time, Rideau Hall, Jenny Carignan, the Chief of Defense Staff, now making her way to Rideau Hall. Laurie, I'm sorry, and I cut you off there. I didn't know if you wanted to complete your thought about the strategy that Doug Ford has taken with Donald Trump that might translate over.
Yeah, I mean, only to say that I think he has been quite a central figure in all of this, and I think immediately, as soon as we heard from Trump that he was thinking of tariffs and he was thinking of taking this pointed, aggressive approach toward Canada, Doug Ford moved into that position as Captain Canada at a time when Trudeau had decided he was going to leave. There was a bit of a sense of vacancy there because, of course, once Trudeau says he's leaving, he's kind of neutralized in a way. People know his runway is coming to an end. And Ford really kind of came to life and filled that space. And so I think now he's got this kind of good cop, bad cop thing happening with the federal side where Ford can be very aggressive and he can get in the mud with Trump a bit, and that leaves the feds an opportunity not to do that. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we still hear quite a bit from Ford over the period of the election campaign.
Could I just add one thing, though? There is a danger of not speaking in one unified voice from the premiers. Doug Ford has been so far playing the Captain Canada role, and quite effectively, but the electricity surcharge he was going to put on significantly amped up the rhetoric from south of the border. Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, is not necessarily on line with those kinds of moves. She believes that diplomacy is the way to approach it.
And I think she said she wanted to be the good cop in this scenario.
Right. So for Mark Carney, it's trying to manage all of those expectations from the premiers and to make sure nobody gets too far away from the songbook that he's trying to write. Yeah,
songbook that he's trying to write. It will be interesting to see. Although, you know, if you lean in on the rhetoric that we heard, let's look at Mark Carney right now. Let's the image is frozen a bit, but once it continues, there we go. Let's just take in the scene right now, Rideau Hall, as Mark Carney makes his way into the residence.
Nous sommes très ciblés. On a d'action. Oh, sorry. C'est à cause de lui. Our message, we're very focused government. Focused on action. We're going to get work.
Top priority, sir? Top priority?
Nous sommes ciblés. on met l'action.
We're going to be very focusing, and we're going to act as of right now. Let me please go in. We have the ceremony.
So there you have it. Mark Carney, Prime Minister designate after being sworn in, will officially become this country's 24th Prime Minister. And after he is sworn in, then he will also swear in his next government. We were talking a little bit about the voice that will be used with Donald Trump. Doug Ford, the Ontario Premier, of course, emerging as Captain Canada in the first few weeks of Trump's presidency. Although, you know, Chris, when you listen to the rhetoric that we heard from Mark Carney, he is going to take a very tough stand against Donald Trump. And arguably, that's the type of stand that the Canadians are looking for right now when you look at the polls, because that's what's lifting the Liberal vote again.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. He said he will keep the counter tariffs in place. He will respond in kind to any further measures that are taken by the United States. And we understand he's jetting off to Europe almost right away, to England and to France, I think in large part to shore up that sort of universal response to the tariff wars that Donald Trump is starting. It's going to be a really difficult job. He said he's going to be completely focused on the economic priorities of the country, which deals primarily right now with tariffs. It is not an enviable task, I can believe, but as Jean Chrétien did say, you know, you take on this job knowing how hard the work and the task ahead will be. Mark Carney has shown that he's capable of doing this kind of work. During the Brexit, he was ahead of the Bank of England. During the 2008 subprime mortgage and then banking problems that existed that led to a global recession, he was the Bank of Canada governor working closely with the then Conservative government. He has lots of experience. To what we said earlier, he has to be able to convince Canadians that he's the right guy for the job now when he doesn't have a ton of political experience compared to his opponents.
Talk about the credibility, though, that's built by the very fact that he's going to Europe. And to your point, you know, Donald Trump has launched this trade war against Canada, but with the steel and aluminum tariffs that came through earlier in the week, last week, excuse me.
It's hard to tell.
It's hard to tell. It all melds into one. He also launched it against Europe, and right now he's threatening to make a 200% tariff against European wines and spirits, which France has reacted to strongly. But here you have Mark Carney going to Europe, building that allyship. Talk about the kind of credibility he builds for his brand, the very fact that he can immediately after being sworn in say, I'm going to go to Europe and fight for Canada.
Yeah, I mean,
you both want to jump on
yeah,
that one.
yeah, let's do it. Like,
Fight.
I think we can do that. I think that Carney is in this moment because of that, able to show he comes to this with an extraordinary global network. He knows these people. He can get these meetings up and running immediately. There's already trust built there. There's already a sense of awareness of what people's positions are, and so I think from that perspective, he really wants to take this time to show Canadians. He's really ready to jump into this, despite the fact that he doesn't have that political experience that other people, and definitely Pierre Poilievre has.
I'd also say you can look at the signal it sends in two different ways. For me, it also sends a message. I'm not so worried about getting ready for an election campaign. I have a job now as Prime Minister. That is my priority, and I believe this is how I can best use my time. He's also not running off to the United States, which I think is equally important, and saying, like, I am going to let the people who are in charge of those files continue to work with their counterparts in the United States. The flip side is, though, it is a difficult time right now. Should he be going to Europe? I'm sure you'll hear some criticism from the opposition parties that there are domestic challenges to also keep track of at home. But I think that's I am in charge. He's sending that message. I am in charge. I'm going to represent Canada. And the best place I can be in my very first week in office is talking to our allies in Europe.
Okay, yeah, that's say very big. So let's just keep playing a bit of the arrivals that we're getting to Rideau Hall, because we are at this point, and excuse me for my hesitancy here, we're just trying to get a measure of what's happening. We seem to have had the majority of people already go in, but if to the control room, feel free to start showing to people back home everyone who's arrived at Rideau Hall, beginning there with Mr. McGuinty and Mr. McKinnon. But let's pick up that conversation. You talk about how that helps in terms of sending a message, but it's arguably that's also going to help in a campaign in a very practical way, Chris, because he may be new to politics, but he is hobnobbing at this point with European leaders who face the similar challenge that Canada is facing.
Yes, the flip side is that, of course, Pierre Poilievre will talk about the problems here at home, housing affordability, all that kind of stuff, and that this whole notion of the World Economic Forum type of background that Mark Carney brings to bear is very different from the one that Pierre Poilievre would bring. So there is a downside risk to it, But in the general sense of things, I think if you're a Canadian now looking at what the biggest problem is that Canada faces, it is a concern about what impact tariffs will have and the need to have a united front, not just within Canada, but from some of our key allies. That if the United States, which was our partner and friend, maybe even like family, is suddenly turning on us, where can we build out our own new trade relationships? Where can we get support for the battle we're trying to wage to say that you are going to suffer as well, United States, if you start imposing tariffs on a wide range of products that will cripple both of our economies?
Yeah, and just a program note for people at home, we were not ignoring Mark Carney. That was essentially what we just played a few minutes ago, just playing some of the visuals of the arrivals that took place as we count down or wait for the swearing in to take place in about 20 minutes' time at Rideau Hall. But